April 29th, 1945, Berlin. The concrete ceiling trembled with each Soviet shell that landed above. Otto Günsche stood at attention outside the Führer's study, his SS uniform still immaculate despite 5 days without sleep. His hands didn't shake. They couldn't. Not yet. Inside that room, Adolf Hitler was dying. Not from bullets or bombs, but from something far more terrifying. The slow realization that everything he had built was collapsing into ash and blood. Otto had seen it in his eyes that morning. The Führer, who once commanded armies spanning from the Atlantic to the Urals, now commanded only 12 rooms of damp concrete, buried 15 meters beneath a burning city. The door opened. Martin Bormann stepped out, his face pale. He looked at Otto and said nothing. He didn't need to. Otto had been with Hitler long enough to read the silence between words. Something had been decided. Something final. "Günsche!" Hitler's voice came from inside, still carrying that strange authority that had once moved millions. "Come." Otto entered the study. The room smelled of paper and sweat and something else. Fear, perhaps, though Otto would never have admitted it then. Hitler sat behind his desk, his left hand trembling with the Parkinson's that had slowly consumed him. Eva Braun sat beside him on the sofa, her face calm but her fingers white where they gripped her handkerchief. "I have given this careful consideration," Hitler began, his voice steady despite everything. "The Russian animals must not have the satisfaction of displaying my body in Moscow. When the time comes, and it comes soon, you will ensure my remains and those of my wife are burned completely. Nothing must remain. Do you understand?" Otto's throat felt tight. "Yes, my Führer." "You have been loyal, Günsche. More loyal than most." Hitler's blue eyes fixed on him. "This is the last service I will ask of you." The weight of those words settled on Otto's shoulders like iron. The last service. Which meant there would be no more orders after this, no more Reich, no more future that resembled anything he had imagined when he first put on this uniform 8 years ago. "I understand, my Führer." But he didn't. Not really. Not yet. The next 30 hours moved like a nightmare in slow motion. Otto went through the motions of his duties, coordinating with the remaining guards, checking on ammunition supplies that barely existed, listening to radio reports that no longer pretended things would improve. The Soviets were 300 meters away now, maybe less. The sound of their tanks was constant, a mechanical growl that never stopped. On the afternoon of April 30th, Otto was summoned again. This time, Hitler and Eva were standing. They shook hands with the remaining staff. Goebbels, Bormann, Krebs, Burgdorf, a handful of secretaries whose names Otto could barely remember through the fog of exhaustion. It felt like a receiving line at a wedding, except everyone knew they were attending a funeral that hadn't happened yet. Hitler's hand was cold when Otto shook it. "Remember your oath," the Führer said quietly. Just that. Then he and Eva retreated into their private quarters. Otto stood in the corridor. Heinz Linger, Hitler's valet, stood beside him. Neither spoke. The bunker fell into an unnatural quiet, as if even the concrete walls were holding their breath. At 3:30 p.m., Otto heard it. A single gunshot, muffled by the heavy door, but unmistakable. His body moved before his mind could process. He pushed open the door. The smell hit him first. Cordite and blood, and something sickeningly sweet. Hitler was slumped on the sofa, his right temple destroyed by the bullet from his own Walther PPK. Blood ran down his face, pooling on the armrest. Eva lay beside him, her face peaceful, her lips still pink from the cyanide capsule she had bitten. 2 bodies. 2 people who had just removed themselves from a world they could no longer control. Otto stared. His mind, trained by years of military discipline, catalogued details automatically. The pistol on the floor, the wall splatter, the way Hitler's mustache was still perfectly groomed even in death, the smell of bitter almonds from Eva's poison mixing with the gunpowder, the absolute silence that followed the gunshot. His hands finally started to shake. "Get blankets," he heard himself say to Linger. His voice sounded far away. "We need to carry them upstairs." Linger disappeared. Otto stood alone with the bodies of Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun. 2 corpses that represented the end of everything he had believed in. 2 corpses he was now responsible for destroying, but the destruction would have to wait. They needed gasoline. In a burning city where every liter of fuel was worth more than gold, they needed enough gasoline to reduce 2 human bodies to ash. Otto wrapped Hitler's body in a grey Wehrmacht blanket. The Führer's face disappeared beneath the wool. Somehow, that made it easier. He wasn't carrying Adolf Hitler anymore. He was carrying a problem that needed solving, a tactical challenge, an order to execute. His mind retreated into the mechanical comfort of duty. Ling returned with Bormann. Together, they carried the bodies up the 4 flights of stairs to the emergency exit. The climb felt endless. Otto's muscles screamed. Hitler was heavier than he looked. The weight of dead flesh always surprised people. By the time they reached the garden exit, Otto's uniform was soaked with sweat despite the spring chill. The garden was barely recognizable. Shell craters overlapped like a moonscape. The once manicured lawn was churned mud and broken concrete. Smoke from 1,000 fires turned the afternoon sky orange and black. The sound of battle was deafening now. Machine guns, artillery, the scream of Katyusha rockets that the soldiers called Stalin's organs. They laid the bodies in a shell crater, side by side. Eva's hand slipped out from under her blanket. Otto noticed her wedding ring. They had married just hours before this, in a brief ceremony that now seemed like something from another lifetime. He pushed her hand back under the blanket and tried not to think about what he was about to do. "The gasoline," Bormann said. His voice cracked. Even Bormann, the ruthless party administrator who had climbed over countless bodies to reach his position, seemed shaken by this. "I'll get it," Otto said, because this was his task, his final service to a man who no longer existed. Finding gasoline in the Führerbunker on April 30th, 1945, was like finding water in a desert. The fuel depot was nearly empty. Otto found 4 jerrycans, maybe 200 liters total. Would it be enough? He had no idea. He had never cremated a human body before. The thought struck him as absurd and horrifying at the same time. He carried the cans up to the garden. Shells were landing closer now. A mortar round exploded 50 meters away, showering them with debris. Otto ducked instinctively, then felt angry at himself for caring about his own survival when he was literally standing over Hitler's corpse. The contradiction didn't escape him, but there was no time to examine it. He unscrewed the first jerrycan and began pouring. The gasoline splashed over the blankets, soaking into the wool, the chemical smell overpowering everything else. He emptied 1 can, then another. The bodies beneath the blankets were just shapes now, anonymous lumps of cloth and flesh waiting to burn. Ling stood beside him, holding a piece of paper he had rolled into a makeshift torch. Their eyes met. Neither wanted to be the one to light it. Neither wanted this responsibility. But orders were orders. Duty was duty, even when duty meant setting fire to the man who had led their nation into total destruction. Otto took the paper torch from Linger's hand. He struck a match. The tiny flame seemed impossibly bright in the smoke-filled garden. For one moment, he had a choice. He could drop the match into the mud. He could refuse. He could say no to this final atrocity that disguised itself as honor. He touched the flame to the gasoline-soaked blanket. The fire didn't spread slowly. It erupted with a roar that made him stumble backward. The heat hit him like a physical blow. The blankets vanished in seconds, and then Otto was staring at Adolf Hitler's burning body. The smell was immediate and overwhelming. Burning hair, cooking flesh, something acrid and chemical from the gasoline. He turned away and vomited into a shell crater. When he looked back, both bodies were engulfed in flames. The fire burned with an intensity that seemed impossible, as if the universe itself wanted to erase what these 2 people had been. Black smoke rose into the already black sky, indistinguishable from the 1,000 other fires consuming Berlin. Otto stood at attention. It seemed like the right thing to do. Bormann and Linger did the same. 3 SS officers giving a final salute to a burning corpse in a shell crater in a lost city in a lost war. The absurdity of it would hit Otto later. Much later, but in that moment his mind was blank. He was a machine following programming, executing orders because that was the only thing left that made sense. The fire burned for over an hour. They added more gasoline twice. Otto made the trips himself, carrying the jerry cans through artillery fire, his mind carefully empty. If he thought about what he was doing, really thought about it, he knew something inside him would break, so he didn't think. He just moved, poured, retreated, watched. By the time the fire began to die, there wasn't much left. Bones, mostly. Fragments of skull. The smell had permeated everything. Would permeate everything Otto touched for days afterward. His uniform reeked of it. His skin reeked of it. He would never be able to forget that smell. They buried what remained in the same shell crater, covering it with dirt and rubble. No marker, no ceremony beyond that strange salute. Adolf Hitler, who had once commanded the worship of millions, disappeared into an anonymous hole in a garden in a burning city. It seemed fitting somehow, or perhaps just inevitable. Otto returned to the bunker. It was 7 o'clock. The world's most powerful man had been dead for less than 4 hours, and already it felt like ancient history. The remaining staff moved through the concrete corridors like ghosts. Nobody spoke about what had happened. Nobody needed to. Magda Goebbels was preparing to poison her 6 children. Otto passed her in the corridor. She smiled at him, that eerie, calm smile of the truly insane, and said something about how her children would not grow up in a world without National Socialism. Her voice was pleasant, conversational, as if she were discussing dinner plans rather than infanticide. Otto kept walking. He had his own survival to think about now. With Hitler gone, his final order completed, Otto was released from the paralysis of duty. For the first time in 8 years, he had to make his own decision. Stay and die, or run, and maybe live. The bunker was dividing into 2 groups. Those who would commit suicide, and those who would attempt to break through the Soviet encirclement. Goebbels would stay and die with his family. Bormann would attempt escape. Krebs and Bergdorf would shoot themselves in a few hours. The secretaries were being offered cyanide capsules and pistols, their choice. Otto chose to run. The decision felt like betrayal at first. He was SS. He was supposed to fight to the last bullet, then use the last bullet on himself. That was the code. That was the oath. But as he looked around the bunker at the corpses in waiting, at the people who had already died inside while their bodies went through final motions, he realized something had broken in him when he lit that fire. He didn't want to die for Adolf Hitler anymore. He didn't want to die for the Reich. He wanted to live, and for the first time since 1937 that desire was stronger than his conditioning. At 10:30 p.m., Otto joined a breakout group assembling in the lower levels. About 20 people, soldiers, officers, a few civilians who had been trapped in the bunker. The plan was simple and desperate. Move through the U-Bahn tunnels to Wedding, then try to reach the Spree River and cross to the western districts, where German forces supposedly still held some ground. The plan had maybe a 5% chance of success, but 5% was better than 0. They removed their SS insignia. Otto tore the runes from his collar with shaking hands. The fabric ripped easily. It was just thread and metal, not the symbol of invincibility he had once believed it to be. He stuffed the insignia in his pocket. Evidence. Proof of who he had been. He couldn't bring himself to throw it away yet. The group moved out at 11:00. The moment Otto stepped out of the bunker's emergency exit, the full reality of Berlin's destruction hit him. The city was an inferno. Every building within sight was either burning or already burned. The sky glowed orange from 1,000 fires. The heat was intense even from a distance. The sound was overwhelming. Explosions, gunfire, screaming, the roar of flames, the crash of collapsing buildings, and the smell, sweet and rotten and chemical all at once. Burning wood and burning rubber and burning flesh. The smell of civilization eating itself. They moved in single file, staying low, using rubble for cover. Soviet artillery fell randomly, but constantly. Otto saw a woman's body in the street, her clothes burned off, her skin blackened. He saw a German soldier hanging from a lamp post, a sign around his neck. Coward. He saw a child's doll lying in a crater, one arm missing, its painted face staring up at the smoke-filled sky. The U-Bahn entrance at Wilhelmplatz was choked with refugees. Hundreds of civilians packed the platform, maybe thousands. all trying to escape east before the Soviets arrived. The smell of unwashed bodies and fear was suffocating. Children cried. Women clutched suitcases containing everything they owned. Old men sat against walls with vacant expressions, too tired to move anymore. Otto's group pushed through the crowd. Some people recognized their uniforms despite the missing insignia and spat at them. One old woman grabbed Otto's sleeve and screamed something about her son who died at Kursk. He pulled away and kept moving. He didn't have time for her grief. He barely had time for his own. The tunnels stretched ahead, dark and flooded with sewage. The group turned on flashlights and waded forward through water that came up to their knees. The smell was horrible. Things floated in the water. Pieces of debris, dead rats, human waste. Otto focused on the person in front of him and tried not to think about what he was walking through. After 200 meters, they heard voices ahead. Russian voices. The group froze. Back, someone whispered. Back now. They reversed direction, moving faster, splashing through the water without caring about noise anymore. Behind them, the Russian voices grew louder. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness. Someone shouted in Russian, then gunfire, sharp cracks that echoed deafeningly in the tunnel. Otto ran. His boots slipped on the tunnel floor. Water splashed everywhere. More gunfire behind him. Someone screamed. He didn't look back. He just ran, his lungs burning, his legs cramping, every instinct screaming at him to survive. They burst out of a different tunnel entrance near Friedrichstrasse. The group had been 20 people. Now there were 12. Otto had no idea who was missing. He didn't ask. A German soldier appeared from behind a burned-out tank, his rifle raised. "Password?" he demanded. Nobody knew any password. They had been living in a bunker for weeks. Passwords were for armies that still had organization, and the Wehrmacht in Berlin was far beyond that. "We're breaking out from the Führerbunker," Otto said. The words felt strange in his mouth. "The Führer is dead. It's over." The soldier lowered his rifle. His face showed no emotion. "I know," he said. "Everyone knows. The Ivans are broadcasting it on loudspeakers. They're telling us to surrender." "Are you?" Otto asked. The soldier laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Where would I surrender to?" "The Russians shoot prisoners. The SS shoots deserters. I'm already dead, just like you. I'm just waiting to find out which bullet has my name on it." Otto didn't have an answer to that. He moved on, leading his group north toward Wedding. The city was a maze of rubble and fire. Street signs were gone. Buildings were collapsed. Bodies lay everywhere. Soldiers, civilians, horses, dogs. Everything that had once lived in this city was now feeding the corpse pile. They were passing through Oranienburger Strasse when the Soviet patrol found them. 20 Russian soldiers with PPSH submachine guns appearing from behind a collapsed wall like ghosts. "Rückwärts, hands up, the universal command." Otto's group raised their hands. There was no point in fighting. They were outgunned and exhausted, and honestly, most of them looked relieved to have the decision taken away from them. Surrender meant you might live. Running meant you would probably die, but surrender also meant captivity, interrogation. Eventually, identification. Eventually, someone would figure out who Otto Günsche was, Hitler's personal adjutant, the man who burned the Führer's body. The man who knew where all the secrets were buried. The Soviets would want to talk to him very badly. A Russian officer stepped forward, young and hard-faced. He said something in Russian that Otto didn't understand. Then in broken German, "USS?" The question hung in the air. If Otto said yes, he would be separated from the group. SS prisoners were not treated well. The stories of what happened to them in Soviet camps made death seem preferable. Otto's hand moved to his pocket, where the SS insignia was hidden. He could produce it, prove who he was, accept whatever came next with the same mechanical discipline that had carried him this far. Instead, he said, "Wehrmacht, infantry." The Russian officer's eyes narrowed. He didn't believe him. Why would he? Otto was too clean, too well-fed, too obviously someone who had been living in a bunker while regular soldiers starved in trenches. But the officer shrugged. They were processing thousands of prisoners every day. One more didn't matter. "You come," the officer said, gesturing with his PPSH. Prisoner camp. War over for you. Otto joined the line of captured soldiers being marched east, away from the fighting, away from the dying, toward an uncertain future in a Soviet prison camp where he would have to maintain his lie every single day or face execution. As they marched through the burning streets of Berlin, Otto looked back once. Somewhere behind him, buried under rubble in an unmarked crater, were the remains of Adolf Hitler, the man Otto had served with fanatical loyalty for 8 years. The man whose body Otto had personally burned to ash and bone. And in that moment, watching Berlin burn, marching towards Soviet captivity, Otto Günsche felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel since April 30th. Relief. Not grief, not rage, not despair. Just relief that it was over. Hitler was dead. The Reich was dead. And somehow, impossibly, Otto was still alive. The march continued through the night. The column of prisoners grew longer as more German soldiers surrendered. They walked past bodies and ruins and fires that would burn for weeks. Some men cried. Some men were silent. Otto was silent. A young Wehrmacht private fell into step beside him. The boy couldn't have been more than 17, his uniform too large for his thin frame. "Is it true?" the boy asked quietly. "Is Hitler really dead?" Otto looked at him. The boy's eyes were red from smoke and tears. He was just a child, really. A child who had been fed lies about glory and greatness, who had been sent to die for an ideology that had just revealed itself as nothing but ashes and screams. "Yes," Otto said. "He's dead. I was there." The boy nodded slowly. "What happens now?" Otto had no answer. What did happen now? The Reich that was supposed to last 1,000 years had lasted 12. The new order that was supposed to reshape civilization had reshaped nothing except turning Europe into a graveyard. The Führer, who was supposed to be infallible, had put a bullet in his own head rather than face the consequences of his failures. "I don't know," Otto finally said. And for the first time in 8 years, that admission didn't feel like weakness. They marched through the ruins until dawn. The fires began to die as morning light crept across the devastated city. Soviet soldiers directed them into a makeshift prisoner assembly area in Tiergarten, or what remained of it. The once beautiful park was now a wasteland of shell craters and burned trees. Otto sat on the ground with hundreds of other prisoners. Guards watched them with tired indifference. Nobody had food or water to offer. The Soviets were barely keeping their own army supplied. Enemy prisoners were not a priority. Around him, men talked in quiet voices. About homes they would never see again, about families who might be dead, about the uncertain future that stretched ahead, blank and terrifying. Otto listened, but didn't participate. His mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about that moment in the garden when he held the burning torch, the moment when he could have said no, the moment when duty and conscience met, and duty won because it always won, because that was how they had trained him, because the alternative was thinking for himself, and that was the most dangerous thing a soldier could do. But the Reich that had demanded his duty was gone now. The structure that had given his obedience meaning had collapsed, and Otto was left with nothing but memories of fire, and the smell of burning flesh, and the knowledge that he had followed orders all the way to the edge of the abyss. What did that make him? A loyal soldier? A war criminal? A coward? All of the above? He didn't know. He suspected he would spend the rest of his life trying to figure it out. A Soviet officer appeared, shouting names from a list. Prisoners were being sorted, categorized, prepared for transport to camps deeper in Soviet territory. Otto's false name was called. The Wehrmacht identity he had claimed. He stood and joined another group being formed. As they were marched toward waiting trucks, Otto caught sight of someone he recognized. Bormann. Martin Bormann, Hitler's secretary, trying to blend in with regular Wehrmacht soldiers, just like Otto was doing. Their eyes met for just a second. Bormann's face showed panic and exhaustion. Then he looked away and disappeared into the crowd of prisoners. Otto never saw him again. Years later, he would hear rumors that Bormann died trying to escape Berlin, that his body was found near a bridge. Other rumors said he escaped to South America. Otto didn't know which story was true and didn't particularly care. Bormann was just another ghost from a world that no longer existed. The trucks took them east, away from Berlin, away from the Reichskorps, toward prison camps in Poland or Ukraine or deep inside Russia, where they would spend years, maybe decades, paying for losses that weren't really theirs, for crimes they hadn't personally committed, for the collective guilt of a nation that had followed a madman into hell. As the truck bounced along rutted roads, Otto closed his eyes. He was exhausted beyond measure, body and soul both depleted, but he was alive. Against all odds, against all reason, he had survived. And survival, he was beginning to realize, was its own kind of prison, because now he had to live with what he had done, with the choices he had made, with the man he had been. The truck drove on through the Polish countryside. Spring was coming. Fields that had been battlegrounds were starting to show green shoots. Life, persistent and stubborn, was already beginning to reclaim the land the war had devastated. Otto opened his eyes and watched the landscape pass. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't know what would happen to him, but for the first time since 1937, he was no longer Otto Günsche, SS officer and true believer. He was just a man, flawed and guilty and uncertain, but human again. And perhaps, he thought, that was enough for now. The war was over. The rest was just survival. And survival was something he had just proven he was very good at, even if he wasn't sure yet whether that was something to be proud of or ashamed of. The truck continued east, toward an uncertain future, toward whatever justice or injustice waited in Soviet camps, toward the long, slow reckoning with everything he had done in the name of duty. Behind him, Berlin burned. The Reich burned, and somewhere in a shell crater, in a ruined garden, the ashes of Adolf Hitler mixed with dirt and rubble, and the countless other ashes of a war that had consumed everything it touched. Otto had lit that fire, and now he would spend the rest of his life trying to extinguish the flames inside himself. If you enjoyed this story of one man's final duty in history's darkest hour, please like and subscribe for more untold stories from World War II. What would you have done in Otto's position? Let us know in the comments below.